right. All right, we're live, man. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, yeah, you bet. My pleasure.
Okay, so for some reason, I don't know if your screen lock is on, but it's the camera's. Yeah, you can just flip it up, right? That's fine. All
That
right.
should not work. Let's fix that. All right. Is that better?
There it is. Perfect.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. There we go.
Hey, well, thanks for taking the time. Where are you
Yeah,
right
you
now?
bet. I'm at our family homestead in central Utah.
Nice. How many acres you sitting on over there?
About 660, roughly.
Okay,
It's not bad.
That's
I
not
can
that bad.
give you a little bit of view of it. You can kind of get
that's beautiful, man.
picture of it. Yeah, it's nice. We enjoy it.
Do you run cattle on there, or what's what can you do with it? Really?
Yeah, sheep and sheep and just we're hoping to get some good gardening going on, so we can start producing a lot of our own vegetables. They have to be by greenhouse because of the elevation here. But
okay,
we're gonna live and work and eat here.
That's cool.
That's the goal.
That's really cool. Have you ever heard of the is it the mitt-lighter gardening?
No.
Yeah, he's based here in Idaho Falls. This guy, it's the craziest thing. Like he's grown huge gardens in Saudi Arabia in the desert, and he'll go up to like northern Russia and grow gardens up there. And he's just a magician. But yeah, I've not seen his greenhouses, but I want to go visit him here one of these days. But apparently he's got these greenhouses. He's growing like lemons and papaya and pineapple, like crazy stuff in his greenhouses. And he goes out there in the winter, and he has like, I think, a little propane heater in there, heats up to 80 degrees, and goes out and reads a book. As just
Does he have a YouTube channel?
I'm sure. So I think it used to be owned by a different guy, and then this Idaho Falls LDS guy took it over. And yeah, and that's what he does now. He goes around, he speaks, and he teaches. But it's amazing. Like they have it down to a pretty fine science, down to like weekly feeding, exactly what you feed the plants, and the way they grow is very specific for space. So really efficient. It's a lot of vertical gardening, but really cool stuff. I got bit with a bug though, man. I'll tell you what, this last year, me and my mom, we planted this garden, and we've got all kinds of crazy stuff going. So it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. That gardening is kind of therapeutic, and it's a good thing for people to be doing.
It's the craziest thing. I feel kind of old. I was like this 80-year-old guy, because I get excited when like I literally post on Instagram, I go pull it up, I'm like, oh my gosh, the peas just popped up, like see like this little, like, these little seeds germinating and stuff, and I'm just giddy about it. It's the weirdest thing. I've never thought that would be me, but oh man, it really is. You go out there and just seeing things grow, for some reason it just affects you, and it's kind of hard to explain. But
what are you growing? What did you pick?
The standards. We've got, let's see. We've got, I did some unique ones this year. We've got some really hot peppers. I've got a California Reaper plant, if you're familiar with the California Reaper. It's the hottest pepper on Earth.
That's crazy.
It's like, what, 2.5 million heat units or something crazy. I don't even know. I don't even know what I'll do with it, but we planted it. So at least we got that going. We've got our peas, carrots, lettuce, corn, cabbage, broccoli.
You ought to try the Japanese cucumber. And I don't know why I just got disturbed. I put do not disturb, and for some reason I'm getting disturbed.
At least you got that Yoda picture to keep us company until you're back with us. So.
Well, let's see if I can figure that out. Why is that happening? Do not disturb is on. I might. What I probably should do is I probably should try to get set up on my laptop, or is it too late? Is it better just to press
we can just keep
through?
going. Yeah, we can just keep going. It won't be a problem. I mean, we can still chat. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just got a few of those different plants. So you said the Japanese cucumber.
The Japanese cucumber, the Armenian cucumber, and then of course everybody should figure out how to make their own pickle garden. Onions, garlic, good tiny cucumber, peppers, and then if you ever wait till you start trying to ferment. You can ferment your cucumbers, or you can can them. Either way, they're good both ways. Both have a really unique taste.
So why the Armenian and Japanese cucumbers? Are they just Good flavor, or what's the benefit?
Well, they're a good mild flavor with a good mild skin. So if you've ever had an English cucumber, the Japanese is better, and the Armenian, if you can't let it overgrow because it'll get massive, but the Armenian is a real good mild cucumber as well.
Cool.
Good for salads. Then you grow your tomato garden and you put your cucumbers with your tomatoes and your mayonnaise, of course, unless you're a mayonnaise hater.
Well, it's funny. I spent a couple years in Russia for my mission, and that's like what they eat there. Well, there's three things that I ate every single day, and that was tomatoes, dill, and cucumber, and they're everywhere. Every corner, there's some lady selling one of those, or all three of those things, and they're some of the tastiest you'll ever have in your entire life. So maybe they have the Armenian cucumber. Where I was living was right above Armenia, so I know, but they were way good.
Yeah, probably.
Way tasty. Yeah. Not those weren't super big, but they just had an amazing flavor to them. It was pretty unique. So.
Yeah, nice.
Well, I've got a question, and this is something I was chatting with you about earlier. I want to know more about masks, and by that, what I mean is, I want to know legally. This is kind of my perspective. I get the whole shutting down businesses and shutting down different things, but as far as requiring masks, does the state have right to do that? Even if, like, let's say this were a real pandemic and people were dying and we had an R naught of 3 and then, it was killing 50% of the population, could the state actually impose mask mandates if it actually worked on a legal level?
Well, I mean, so there's a practical answer and there's a theoretical answer. And practically, we all know the answer to that question. Of course they can. They just did.
Yeah.
And nobody cared enough to do anything about it except for a small segment of the American population that whined and complained to their local school district that it wasn't fair that their kids had to wear masks at government schools. But what do you expect when you put your kid in a government school? And what do you expect when you elect a bunch of deadbeat politicians who don't understand the Constitution or history? So
Constitution-wise, though, is there any kind of situation where legally, like, again, if this was a real pandemic, people were really dying, I mean, if it was devastating the country on a constitutional, moral level, is there a place the state can do that?
Sure. Well, again, it's still a theoretical and a practical answer. The courts, since the founding of our nation and the institution or the establishment of the American Constitution, we have empowered the judiciary to interpret the law. And over a couple hundred years, they've done that. And one of the areas of law that lawyers and judges and politicians have crafted is the right for the government to manage our lives in states of emergency. And where they can't do it legally, those same powers, legislative and judicial powers and executive powers, tend to write laws, or the judiciary tends to interpret laws within the subsequent years to make it legal. And so by the time we as people catch up to what they're doing, the emergency is either over or justified. And that helps to settle both the interpretation and the enactment of the law. I would say that the more important review for Americans to do is to ask themselves, are you happy with what the government was just able to do? Did you realize that the government could do that? And is that what you thought the government should be doing? And if the answer to those questions is no, we all might want to rethink what we've been doing with our lives and our votes.
The one thing that really knocked my socks off, again, the mask thing, I was like, I don't really know where that fits, because at first we didn't really know. At least I didn't. I was like, I don't really know. Is this going to be a real thing? Is this blown up? And some people were saying, oh, this is going to be the worst thing ever. Like, they're downplaying it. But in reality, it's going to be way worse than anyone imagined. I mean, I didn't have any idea, but the one thing that scared me to death was how quickly we shut down religious freedom. and how
Yeah.
quiet everyone was about it. I really couldn't believe it. I mean, even up here in northern Idaho, there was, I think, a whole congregation that was out singing in their field. They were 6 feet apart, wearing masks and just singing hymns, and they came and were arrested. And I couldn't believe that. It's like, why is there not an outrage about this? I mean, that's the most insane thing. I mean, again, because for me, going back to the Constitution, I don't know it like you do, but the right to free assembly, I don't think that can be suspended, can it? I mean, like, under any real circumstance, can you ever truly suspend the right to worship?
Well, think of the first 3 words of the United States Constitution: "We the people." And when we the people elect politicians over a 100-year period of time who don't understand the Constitution, and when they do, tend to define themselves in categories of conservative, moderate, liberal, and think that that's satisfactory for political purpose and constitutional interpretation,
What do you
you're
mean by
not
that?
going to
Categorize themselves in parties as substantial?
we Americans have been convinced that the way to preserve constitutional republics is to allow our system to be governed by a bipartisan electoral system under which Republicans and Democrats, or the Republican and Democrat Party, control almost all functions of government within the United States. And so we tend to define constitutionality and conservatism and liberalism based upon that false dichotomy of Republican versus Democrat. And what ends up happening is these two parties are just engaged in a war of aggregating money under their banners and perpetuating the plans and schemes of the lobbyists who give them money. That has nothing to do with the Constitution or freedom of assembly. So we just don't have body politics that are concerned with freedom of assembly.
So
They don't care.
All Americans kind of find peace in saying, as long as I'm a good party member, that's what's important, not so much as long as I'm a good citizen.
We live a fiction, and we believe things that aren't true. And when those mythologies come crashing down like they did in 2020, everybody whines and complains until their politicians set it straight again. And the politicians don't actually set it straight. They just appease us all so that they can go back to living. You know, you've probably heard the saying, Washington, D.C. is a cesspool. Yeah, until you win an election and get back there and realize it's a hot tub, and you tell your constituents it's a cesspool while you party in the hot tub with all the lobbyists and the money. And so at the end of the year, what you're there to do is to approve massive appropriations budgets that enrich politicians and the companies who lobby. Our constitutional republic isn't a constitutional republic anymore. It's I don't even know what you'd call it. It's a socialist democracy. So it's always funny to me to hear people say, America is a constitutional republic. And I'm like, since when? That dream like flew the coop 100 years ago.
You think it was that long ago that you would call it a republic?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Well, I mean, you can call it a republic, but we don't behave like a republic. We don't spend like a republic, and we don't elect like a republic. And clearly in 2020, we did not treat the American people like they were in charge of a constitutional republic, because the Constitution got thrown out the window, which is why you didn't have freedom of assembly last year, which is why all of the courts, all of the legislative bodies, and pretty much all of the governors throughout the United States just went headlong into this whole COVID-19 mask and vaccination scheme. And all of our rights just flew out the window. Now they were gone already. You of course can't do that in that short amount of time, which is why every American should familiarize themselves with what a model law is, and understand that most legislation and policy that happens in the United States comes from the enactment of model laws that come down from associations and organizations who spend their entire year dreaming up how to regulate our lives. They don't think of it that way. They
Okay,
think
so
of themselves.
I'm gonna show you how ignorant I am, but
Sure.
I don't fully understand what a model law is. So a model law is something that's been crafted by bureaucrats and politicians. Is that kind of
Well,
what I'm gathering?
sort of. In the United States, almost every political body that you can think of,
Mm-hmm.
your county council, your city council, your
Mm-hmm.
mayors, your county mayors, your state legislators, your governors, they all belong to what are essentially unions. They're called associations.
Mm-hmm.
And they use our money through taxpayer funded appropriations bills to basically get themselves into these associations like the League of Cities and Towns, or the Association of Counties, or the National Governors Association, the American Legislative Exchange Council. The list goes on. And they go back to these organizations, which are heavily run by basically bureaucrats, lobbyists, special interest groups, and other
Mm-hmm.
types of nonprofit organizations who spend their years trying to craft legislation that is favorable to their industries and their interests. And then they bring those model laws back to our states and counties and cities with these stupid legislators. Pardon my language, that's just what they are. They have no idea what they're doing. They go get briefed on these things, think that they're intelligent about them, because everybody makes politicians feel important. That's what lobbying is about.
I have to ask one thing here, because you mentioned this at one point, and I want to know how much this you think is true. But you mentioned once to me that the majority of the reason that anybody runs for any office is to stroke their own ego. How much that, there's people out there that are probably just doing it for the right reasons, but how often do you think that's the case, that it's more about an ego trip?
There's a lot of people who think they're doing it for the right reasons. They think that they are better than the next guy. But
Mm-hmm.
How's that going for us? If it's not about their egos, why do we continually lose freedom? And why do we continually go farther and farther into unmanageable debt as a nation? Clearly, we are not electing the right people. If we were, it wouldn't be going this way. Clearly, we're not a constitutional republic that puts the people first. If we were, things wouldn't be going this way.
Well, so can I follow up with another question on this one?
Sure.
If that's the case, if the founders saw this now, you think they would change the Constitution? If they saw what we were at now, would they go, oh, we need to put a lot more restriction here? Would they try? Do you think they would actually shift really anything, or is this part of the plan? I mean, from my understanding, the Constitution was designed to kind of sway between freedom and lack of freedom. It was kind of designed to be a little bit flexible, right? To be able to handle, because they just knew people were going to be corrupt. It was the one certainty of all government is that it corrupts, right?
Yeah. Well,
so do you think they would actually change anything?
No. I think Benjamin Franklin. So a couple things. First of all, Benjamin Franklin had it right. God had a hand in the establishment of the Constitution. And even if his hand wasn't direct and readily identifiable, which I would say it was, a sparrow cannot fall to the ground with his knowledge. Surely God knew what America was and what America would become. And in crafting the Constitution, they crafted for us a document that would allow us to protect our families and our own local governmental autonomy as families. And what we've done to that Constitution is exactly what they knew we would do. We corrupted it over time by becoming fat, lazy, and stupid. And when you become fat, lazy, and stupid as a people, you don't deserve to keep the liberties that those great men and women fought for, that God helped them to establish. And you naturally bring upon you the judgments of God.
So where was the shift
when
then?
You do bad things.
So we were doing good.
Right. Yeah. It started
happened?
almost right away.
Right. Which you would guess, right?
You even see. Yeah, sure. You see George Washington, prior to the time he finishes his term as president, second term, implementing a whiskey tax for which there's a whiskey rebellion. And so almost immediately as a country, we can't keep it together. We can't maintain the good elements of the Constitution. At the same time, we also only after significant amounts of time mustered the courage and the strength to cure the deficiencies of slavery. We also failed to protect the early Latter-day Saint Church, and they were allowed to be driven and killed from state to state, and America largely justified that based on religious intolerance. So we've got some pretty.
Can I pause here really quick on that? Just for those of you that don't know quite what that's about. The LDS Church was founded in the early 1800s, and long story short, they were pretty much driven from every area that they lived. New York to Ohio, Ohio to Missouri, Missouri to, with other stops along the way, but driven over and over. Yeah. And I think, wasn't it until 1978, is that true? Or like 1970s that there was still an extermination order for all Mormons in the state of Missouri?
Yeah, there was a governor ordered
shoot on site kind of thing.
Yeah, that you could kill a Mormon legally. That's in our country's history. And when the early Latter-day Saints went to the President of the United States to appeal to the Constitution for protection, the response of the President of the United States was something that has now become completely foreign to us. He said, state sovereignty. I can't interfere with states. And the response was, no, that's exactly what the Constitution is for, so that the federal government will step in where states are depriving people of their unalienable natural rights. So we've always had a problem with our constitutional observance.
That was Abraham Lincoln, right? So we had, on one extreme, we had an extermination order for Mormons because of a religious belief you could shoot somebody. And then on the flip end, I know that Abraham Lincoln is under still under massive criticism for, in some people's opinions, abolishing state rights, that he overreached to kind of fix the corruption with slavery. And that's kind of what he did. He had to essentially change state rights and massively amp up the federal power. Do you think he overswung on that?
Yes. No, a people who are allowed to govern themselves end up getting collectively what they deserve. So if we had honored the Constitution in the way that we were supposed to, we wouldn't have ever had the Lincoln problem or the Civil War problem, because we had deprived an entire race of their unalienable and fundamental rights at the inception of our country. And so, naturally, when you don't follow natural law, God's laws, there are consequences for that. And so America couldn't maintain its republic, and it became, under Lincoln, what I would say was a representative democracy. We changed from a constitutional republic at that time to a representative democracy. And then what we did shortly thereafter.
What does that mean, a representative democracy? I don't understand that shift and what that would look like.
So a constitutional republic, it starts with the premise that all rights are inherent in the individual, that the people can come together to protect individual rights and
given to them by God.
To limit the government. A representative democracy, and this is where you need to distinguish between what a political democracy is versus an economic democracy. A political democracy is where majority rules. And what we did under Lincoln was we started to shift towards a representative democracy where we elected people who would then go and decide our fate based upon majority rule. We shifted that again in the 1920s and 30s when we turned America into a socialist democracy and started to believe that government should guarantee to people a certain standard of living. And from that point in time, we've never looked back.
Okay, so in the 1920s and 30s, you say that there was a shift there. What was that? Was there an amendment that was passed or a president that started enacting certain laws? What was the shift there? Okay, we had a little lag there and lost connection for a second, but anyways, going back to that. So in the 1920s and 30s, you were saying that there was kind of a political change that occurred, and we shifted from that representative democracy.
So I'd love to have a political and religious conversation with you here, but it's probably too much to cover in the time we have. But
so typically speaking, whenever we get into that rabbit hole, like, well, it's funny for those listening at home. I mean, we've had conversations till 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
At least, right? Anyways, yeah. there's plenty to talk about. Go ahead.
I'll try to stick to kind of political, I guess. In the 1910 to 1920s, we had some massive shifts in the way our economy was run and in the way political power was exercised in America. You saw the elimination of the election of senators, US senators, by state legislatures. And a lot of people think that's good, but what it did was it disempowered states, and it took away a lot of state power, allowing the federal government to exercise their hand when it came to money. Prior to that time, a state could govern or check the federal effort to spend on a federal level and empower a federal level, because those US senators have to go home and report to their state legislature. But once you shift them to popular vote, you're going more towards a pure representative democracy, or further and deeper into that representative democracy, and taking away that power of the state to keep a damper on national budgets or federal budgets. We also saw the implementation of the income tax, which made it possible for the federal government to directly tax every American based upon their labor. Go back to your, whether you are a person who believes in the Bible or not, except for one moment that ancient record might contain some wisdom in it, because it's a record that's come from a bunch of people over thousands of years who have gone through some stuff that often wasn't pleasant. And one of the first things that is acknowledged in the Bible is that man has the right to labor and to go by the sweat of his own brow to reap the benefits of his labor. And when the federal government gets to tax that directly or through an employer, you get to start to meddle and suppress the economy. And that's a great tool for a socialist democracy, which is what was being laid. And next, you get the implementation of the Federal Reserve, which I won't go into right now, but what a rabbit hole that has become. And is. And
so sure. I'm looking at this from maybe a wider perspective, and maybe this is the optimist in me. But whenever you've heard about the cycle of wealth and families, right? How it's typically a 3-generational cycle. You'll get the man that has nothing, he's rags to riches, builds up this big empire, passes it over to his son who has no idea what he's doing, has been raised, spoiled his whole life, burns it to the ground. By the time he dies, very often the cycle has virtually repeated itself. And so it's like you'll have a rich man, the son that coasts off his father's wealth, he drives it to the ground, his children are raised poor, and it's rags to riches all over again. And by a similar token, for me, it feels like I look at the Constitution maybe as a living document, right? It was based on such firm principles, like you're talking about natural law, the laws of God, the laws of the universe. I mean, there's just so many different words for it, but based on things that are so eternal that it's designed to sway this way, isn't it? Right? Aren't we? I mean, I'm not saying that we're designed to live in corruption, but aren't we? I mean, aren't we kind of designed to live in corruption? Wasn't that what the Constitution was written for? Was for corruption, and that it takes maybe a war or something really tragic to happen, so that people go, oh yeah, and the Constitution gives them kind of the framework to get their rights back again.
I actually think first you got to go to the fundamental philosophical question: is there a higher power or not? And if not, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's all just human opinion. We're little bugs on one little tiny rock.
If there's no divine power up there, then it's just a luck of the draw. We have this sperm lottery going on. Who got to be born in the 1960s? You know what I mean?
Yeah, someday there's going to be a supernova that takes us all out.
Yeah.
If there is a higher power, then there's a consequence for the exercise of free will. And if there's a consequence, an eternal, immutable consequence for the exercise of free will, then you can't just do anything you want. And more than likely, well, you can, but you're going to screw everybody over, right? The
Yeah.
natural consequence of doing stupid things is that everything falls apart pursuant to the second law of thermodynamics. So what happens is it built for a corruptible people? Yes. But I think really what the Constitution is a divinely inspired document that God gave us so that we could once again prove to ourselves that even with, even with his help, we can't do it. And so God's basically giving us thousands of years to prove to ourselves that we can't do it. And by the end of that time,
so you're saying even with God's help, we can't do it?
Yeah. Well,
How
it depends on how you define that help. The Constitution was given by the help of God or providence.
Right.
And we couldn't do it. We failed. We've blown it. I mean, we've had since 1787. Prior to that, we had, from 1620 to 1776, where people took this country and built it into one of the most economically, politically successful countries on the face of the earth. Arguably, you could say there were some things we didn't quite do right. But if you gauge it by technological advancement and prosperity, our ability to feed people, to live at a certain standard of living, to pursue arts and sciences to a degree previously undiscovered, to create a population on this earth, whether you like that or not, that is unprecedented because of the capacity to produce food and feed people and create health and wellness. We were relatively successful here in the United States of America, so successful it poured over to the rest of the world and changed the entire world. Now, on the other hand, it also has made us quite proud and made us capable of destroying everything we ever created and more. And I think that's what God does with his children. He lets us run around acting like we know something to eventually prove to ourselves that we don't know anything and that we really do need him and that we should probably do what he says. And that takes a while for people to get, usually till you're about 80.
and even then, I think we're all still pathetically naive. Okay, so going back to what you're saying though about we've blown it. I'm confused, and maybe I'm just not seeing this the same way. But for me, I'm going, man, we've never had a time like this, and I'm starting. We're starting to see maybe a churn, but we're riding off of like what maybe the greatest economic high possibly in history, depending on who you ask. I mean, for sure since the 1950s though. Technology's never been better. Advancement's never been better. I mean, things are still incredible. So I guess, how do you mean we've blown it? Just because you're seeing this turn downward, and you kind of you're projecting that we're going to have a total loss of freedom here in the next certain number of years.
Last year, all the fundamental premises upon which our nation was built, individual rights, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, redress of grievances, due process, all of those were taken away in less than 2 months. So how free can we be if a virus with a survival rate of over 97% is used to justify not only the shutting down of the world economy, but the deprivation of all fundamental rights upon which America was founded? Right. That's not a nation that knows how to shepherd those rights into the future. And barring some significant change and re-education as to what we need to do as a people to maintain our technological advancement, our economic prosperity, and basically our cultural and moral foundation, barring our re-education in that regard, the definition of insanity is believing that you can do the same thing over and over and expect different results.
Yeah.
Our past 50 years have led to 2020.
Hmm.
We better change.
Well, it's kind of like Rome, right? I mean, I think of Rome and how they were untouchable, right? For so many years. I mean, you could not crack that nut. I mean, they were the leading of everything, right? I mean, they were the world superpower without any doubt. But I think historically speaking, they were very unique because, again, they reached a point of economic prosperity where people just sat around in robes all day, right? I mean, that's why art became so famous, is because people were just like, yeah, we don't really have any needs, you know? And then what was it? I mean, just in a couple of years, Rome went from world superpower to just collapsed. I don't know exactly what the timeline was, but it's interesting because it's usually hasn't hit until it hits, you know? Things are good, and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, you know, you're in free fall. And so,
well, go back to that cycle you described about people who earn things and subsequent generations who despoil
mm-hmm.
them. And you know, look no further than Portland, Oregon, where they turned a place that was once called Stumptown into a thriving, beautiful city on a beautiful river, which they are now burning and defecating on so severely that Portland is no longer considered a premier city. It's a riotous mess.
Yeah.
That's what subsequent generations who don't understand hard work and liberty do to foundations built upon things like God and constitutional rights. Right? You can't disconnect those things. You can't take constitutional rights and disconnect them from a higher power. They don't exist without a higher power. They're figments of our imagination. So it's unreasonable to expect that a nation who has disenfranchised itself from God and the fundamental foundations of their liberty to be able to maintain that liberty. And then to say, well, technology and economic prosperity can make up for that. No, that's where those two things came from. Technology and economic prosperity came from observance of providential laws that create liberty, which creates prosperity and technology.
So this is maybe a little bit off the track a little bit, but I'm kind of curious as well. Every time that we've been together, you've always got a million things going on in your head, right? I mean, your mind's going a million miles an hour. I don't know how on earth you're able to keep all that information in your brain, because it freaks me out sometimes. This one time you were reading an article, or you were quoting something, and I was looking at the Wikipedia article, and you were almost quoting bullet point by bullet point, and I was like, what on earth? This is creepy. This article you read, I don't even know when, but with all that, how have you found a way to, I don't know, unwind? How do you deal with all that pressure? Because I mean, every time that you seem like you're sometimes under extreme pressure, especially with the Ammon, the Bundy cases that went on. Have you found ways to unwind and to cope with that level of stress and intensity all the time?
You know, I have a good family. I have a wonderful wife. I have wonderful kids. I have good friends. I try to surround myself with people who are better than me. And when it came to the Bundy cases, that was absolutely the case. I got to work with one of the greatest trial attorneys, arguably in the history of the United States, Marcus Mumford. I worked with a paralegal who was brilliant named Rick Kerber. I could go off and name several others who were just incredible people. And so in that sense, I like to work with people who are better than me. But at the same time, there's a shortage of our ability to do those types of things anymore as people because of how oppressive our government is becoming. You know, when you think about the Bundy cases, for example, the Ammon, Ryan, and their co-defendants in Oregon were acquitted by a jury, an Oregon jury, full acquittal. We then went to Nevada, where a judge who was appointed by Barack Obama and Harry Reid, right? So there's no favoritism coming from some Trump-appointed judge who looked at these farmers and ranchers and saw what the government had done and dismiss the case with prejudice because of the government's outrageous misconduct. Not one single one of those government employees, attorneys, investigators, except for one guy who was investigated by a congressional inquiry for corruption in another matter, not one of them has had to deal with the kind of persecution or dismissal from their jobs like those of us in the Bundy cases have had to do, or even worse, like Ammon Bundy, Ryan Bundy, Cliven Bundy, Ryan Payne, and others had to go through 2 years of incarceration for the outrageous misconduct of the government. Jeanette Finicum lost her husband in Oregon as a result of this misconduct. The media doesn't talk about it. There is no mainstream effort to bring to light the severe corruption that exists today inside of our, how should I say it? Our Justice Department of the United States of America. And so there is some level of pressure which you just can't handle. And so you make a decision, at least in my case, where you decide to go do something else in life. And for me, that something else was to focus more in my state on smaller cases and everyday lives that I could help versus trying to tackle the behemoth, the evil behemoth that is our United States justice system. It's just horrible. And so I guess
when you went and told, I mean, there's no way we could tell this story in the time that we have, but
no,
unbelievable. Just the thing after thing after thing that you went through with the justice system. I'm curious though, do you think there are people, this is an abstract question. Have you ever seen, it's called 6 Underground, it's a Netflix movie?
No.
Yeah, it's a little violent, it has some language, but it's Ryan Reynolds, and I love Ryan Reynolds. So I was like, I gotta watch this. He's a super rich billionaire. He goes, fakes his death and sets up a team of people that fight corruption behind the scenes. Right? I mean, exact opposite. And everyone to some degree, I mean, with very few exceptions, I've met some people that are like this, but with very few exceptions, everybody believes that there is pretty deep corruption depending on where you look, right? I mean, some people think, oh yeah, the United States is kind of corrupt, but Ukraine is really corrupt. I mean, whatever it is, everyone believes that there's people out there, they get together, they band up, and they, I mean, as the LDS culture calls it, secret combinations, high level corruption. But I wonder, in your opinion, do you think there's people out there that are doing the exact opposite? You know, people that are fighting for rights and good things. I think it's important to understand the difference between. So first of all, define. You know, there are a lot of words we've become uncomfortable with. One of them is evil. Evil just means mischievous and injurious. And our government generally is mischievous and injurious, but that doesn't mean that everybody within government. Injurious to cause injury. It is tends to do more harm than good these days. And so when we look at corruption, I think it's more helpful to define corruption from the perspective of systemic corruption rather than always collective and individual corruption. Obviously, there are corrupt individuals, but obviously, collectively speaking, everybody is not corrupt inside of our government. But systemically speaking, a foundation or a building can become compromised systemically. And the Justice Department of the United States absolutely has very virtuous people in it, but also, I believe, has systemically corrupted itself. It can no longer understand the moral foundations of God's law because we deny God's existence. And therefore, justice is an arbitrary construct
created by the collective will of the people or lobbyists who succeed in creating the moral construct of the law.
Mhm.
And what we need to do as a people is if we want to clean that systemic corruption out, it requires an alteration of our moral foundation. And unless you fix the collective moral foundation, which starts with individual activity and families, unless you do that, there's no chance that systemic corruption is ever going to be fixed, because you have an arbitrary moral.
So
go ahead.
Well, so what you're saying essentially is, even if there was a group like this, right? Let's just hypothetically, there's people out there that are fighting against corruption. Even if hypothetically they were out there, it wouldn't really matter, because the American people themselves are already lacking morality.
Well, I would say it's not that it doesn't matter. All individual action matters. And that's why I believe in a higher power. That's why I believe in eternal, immutable consequence. Everything you do that is good matters.
Mhm.
And at the same time, no matter how much good you do, that doesn't mean that it's going to tip the scales to a collective resurgence of, or a resurgence of good collective behavior, right?
Mhm.
Just because you go do good doesn't mean America is going to turn around, get itself in order,
Right.
and set the moral foundation straight.
Isn't
But you should still go do good.
I think I learned about this back when I was actually studying stuff that was meaningful. Let's see, this is pre-college days. The Aristotle's four principle, or is four safeguards for freedom: private virtue, public virtue, widespread education, and love of homeland. If I remember right, that's kind of what he listed was his core fundamental ideas that really create a free people. You have to have people that are actually virtuous in their private lives behind closed doors. You have to have people that are virtuous on a public level, what they do when they're around others, how they interact in society. You have to have people that are educated, and then you have to have that love of homeland. And it's funny, because that's exactly what I feel like is in a lot of ways under attack. Break down the moral, make people morally. And again, as an American citizen, I believe anyone can be as free as they want to be, right? I mean, you do what you do in your own life, and that's up to you. But it's ironic that despite that needing to be a freedom that people can choose to burn their lives to the ground, those collective actions do undermine everything that America stands for. It's just kind of interesting kind of dichotomy there.
Tackle a more foundational problem. I don't necessarily disagree with those concepts, but they're simply concepts that need to have certain things filled into them. Like, for example, what is virtue?
Mm-hmm.
So if we say that private virtue matters, who gets to define what virtue is? Who gets to define what virtuous action is? And therefore, what's really happening in America is a war over what is virtuous. So that, because both sides would agree that private virtue sounds like a good thing. The difference is, what is virtuous? And that's what the battle is over. What is public virtue? That's what the battle is over. And so this culture war that's going on, this political, religious, social, cultural war in America today, is to redefine what our values should be.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I've kind of come to believe that, I mean, and people that listen to my podcast, and you know this, I mean, I have a pretty good root in my belief in God, but I also believe that everyone inherently knows. I mean, going back to what is virtue, it's funny, I listened to a speech by Stephen Covey. I think he went and spoke at some college somewhere, and he sat the youth down, and he was debating them on moral chastity, on keeping yourself sexually clean, and which is like the craziest battle ever to fight, right? This is at a college campus, totally secular college in Arizona, I think. And there's just a huge debate going back and forth. And finally, at one point, I thought this was very profound. He said, okay, can I ask a favor from everybody? Just calm down for a second. put your biases up on a shelf, and I just want you to search inside your heart. This is going to sound really weird. Dig really deep. Ask yourself sincerely, without any bias at all, what does your heart tell you is right or wrong? And he said it was one of the most amazing experiences of his life, where he said, this one kid's hand shoots up, and I can't explain this, but I feel like it's wrong, and I don't know why. Because he kind of appealed to their sense of moral fairness and said, just be honest and fair with me as I will be with you. Sincerely, like, dig deep. Tell me what you honestly feel, not so much what your brain's telling you. What are you feeling? And I thought it was very interesting. And I'm sure some people are going to disagree with this analogy or this example, but I think it's so inherent in us. I really do. I think that, it's funny. Even people that are really caught up, the second they slow down their brain for a second and say, yeah, oddly enough, even though I've emotionally agreed with it for such a long, or I've intellectually agreed with this for such a long time, emotionally I don't feel good about it, and I can't explain why. So going back to virtue, though, I think that as people tap into that, I think that's where that creates that safeguard of freedom, right? People just need to start listening to themselves, and I think a lot of the answers are inside. And again, there's this whole battle going on of what's right. Everyone's fighting for this, like I said, a stance on morality, but it seems like the main core is just people have to dig deep inside themselves. And a lot of the answers are there.
Well, I do agree with that. I'd go back again to take that final pillar of Aristotle's. I can't remember what you called them, but the widespread
Safeguards,
education.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we don't even have that anymore. We've turned widespread education into this notion that
Common
governmental,
Core.
or just even get rid of Common Core, get rid of modern notions of whether or not critical race theory is okay, and just go back to the method that we educate by: industrial style, institutional government indoctrination. That's never going to end well. That's
Right.
the dumbest system you could possibly make, and yet most conservative and liberal mothers throughout the United States of America, for some reason, think that sending their kids off to industrial, institutional government indoctrination centers is a good idea.
Well, and
we're
no,
crazy. We've just become crazy.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I get a lot of crap for it. I dropped out of college, and it's funny whenever I tell people that, I kind of get that. Okay. And I'm like, okay, and they can choose to believe what they want to believe, but people are like, well, why would you do that? I said, I didn't like being told what to think. Oh, but like, you don't get told what to think. I'm like, you absolutely get told what to think. You think, it's not designed, and it's a marketing scam. And I feel like I have to preface this. If you're studying medicine, I can definitely see a space for that. If you're studying certain topics, I can definitely see where having a good formal education helps. But for the most part, information's everywhere. Like, for example, I would be much better suited to go and call you and say, hey, teach me about politics and law, than I would ever getting my 4-year degree in political science or something. It's ridiculous, because I'll spend all this time fulfilling what a professor thinks, as opposed to real education. And so I think that's kind of where the fundamental change also happened, was that we started to believe that someone else should be putting ideas into our head, rather than saying, let's start at a root level, develop curiosity in the child, and the child will find the answers that they need. That's natural. And we destroy love of learning at such a young age that it's funny when kids say, I don't like reading. That's a messed up thing. Like, that's crazy.
Ask yourself this question. First of all, is there a God? I don't care. I do care how people answer that question, but just for the sake of this exercise, let's start with that question. Is there a God?
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, or if the answer is no, the next question is still undeniable. Okay. So the reason the first one becomes important is if there is a God, then there is an order to be respected based upon the next question. How does every child come into this world?
Sex.
Every single one. Well, yeah, but that's not enough.
Right.
So what has to happen for every child to get into this world? A woman has to carry that child in her stomach to a sufficient term in order to deliver that child into life, or into the oxygen of this world. Every single kid.
Right.
So if there is a God, And even if there is not, who is best suited to make decisions related to that child, all things being equal? You know, she's not a drug addict. She's not
Yeah.
a physical abuser. She's not a sexual abuser. She's a good mom.
Hmm.
I'll tell you, it's not the government.
Absolutely.
It's parents. And studies have shown over and over that a man and a woman who agree to parent together are the most successful government on the face of the earth for children. And yet, for some reason, at the age of 4, 5, and 6, we think it's more important for parents to take off into the workplace and to turn their kids over to people with bachelor's degrees from your local university and college. It's absolutely batshit crazy. Why we do it, I have no, I mean, I do understand why, because we've been taught for 100 years to do it that way.
Yeah.
Go figure. And you wonder why we're falling apart as a country. Start parenting.
Yeah, and it is the home, and it's the funny thing is, especially as a kid, that's always what I heard is, you know, everything starts in the home, everything starts in the home. But as an adult now, I'm just looking, going, man, it's everything. Every problem we face is fixed with a moral home environment.
Right.
We're about out of time here. I wanted to ask you one more question. I've asked this to many people, and I love hearing everyone's different responses. But is there a current lesson of this phase of your life? You know, for example, sometimes there's kind of a phase, and you're like, oh, my big takeaway from that 1 year period, that 3 month period, that whatever period was this big lesson. Are you in a phase right now where you're learning a valuable lesson? And what is that lesson?
Yes. I would say, how do I say this right? I've always inherently known who I was. And I've always been afraid to be unabashedly who I was. And I would say, as early as possible, be true to the internal conscience within you that knows exactly who you should be. And for me, that was a relationship with God and a willingness to speak about Him in a way that is that I can do. And we live in my belief, we live in a world that makes it difficult for people to speak about what they truly believe, because we've become we're kind of a judgmental people, you know. and I'm guilty as charged, right? So
well, it makes us uncomfortable when people are too open. The vulnerability, when people when people are ever vulnerable, we get very uncomfortable because we can't imagine ourselves being that vulnerable. So hey, I know you're trying to show me who you really are, but kind of put it in the can right now, because that makes me feel bad about the front that I'm putting on.
There are so many other things I would say, but I'd say for me lately, that has been it. I'm becoming more comfortable about how, this may sound odd, but how religious of a person I have always wanted to be. And we live in a society where in politics and law, you're not supposed to talk about God.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you cannot. It just seems like a dishonest conversation if we're not starting with our foundational beliefs.
I love that. Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy and you're always going a million miles an hour, so I really do appreciate the time. Is there a place that people can, I mean, if they wanted to learn more about your story, I mean, I don't know, have you recorded that the Bundy case anywhere, that and how that all went down? Is there any recording of that?
I keep a recording of everything with 5 different friends who will never be named, just in case the government comes after me.
Well, one of these days we'll have to do another interview, and I need you to tell that story, because that was insane. I could not believe it when I heard it. But is there a place people can find you if they want to contact you or ask you any questions?
I'm not much of an exhibitionist, so you probably will have to find me on Facebook because I'm a little bit old school and that's about it. And you'll see some of my rantings on Facebook. Otherwise, you got to get a hold of me and ask me to come out and visit with. I've told people ever since last year, you put 10 families or couples or people in a room and I'll come talk to them and tell them the story. And
Awesome.
I'm not picky about numbers. I'm not big on fanfare. So
Well, you've been here
Facebook's
3
probably the best
times,
way.
Idaho Falls, right? 3 times?
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, twice at the dealership and once at my parents' house. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, again, hey, thank you so much, seriously, and
You bet.
we'll see you soon.
Okay. Good to see you. Take care.